Continuing the essentials of workers' compensation, the workers' comp insurance policy is what we're covering today. Workers' comp insurance is mandated by law. Basic coverage is the same in every state. It favors the injured worker. The fully insured policy. Cheaper, not better. Check the details.
Workers' comp insurance is the most hated insurance part of an employer's insurance portfolio. If you ask an employer how their general liability is going, or their products, their completed operations, property, auto, D&O, E&O, etc., you might get some blank stares, you might get some okays. You ask them about their workers' comp, their jaws start to tighten, they get a little bit more concerned. And the reason is, going back to workers' comp insurance is mandated by law. All the rules and regulations are essentially stacked in the injured worker's favor. An injured worker can use a workers' comp claim as retribution against an employer. And how does that happen? Well, in a variety of ways, one of which the injured worker has been put on notice that their performance is slipping, and if things don't improve, they may have to be let go. All of a sudden, a miraculous back injury occurs, and the employer is beside themselves, and in no other aspect of their insurance does this come into play. So it's a very unfortunate situation. And again, the employer can help themselves through this process by taking the necessary steps, hopefully before the injury occurs. But if they don't, they can certainly try to take the necessary steps after the injury occurs. Workers' comp insurance specifically for California employers, and California unfortunately is the worst venue in the 50 states. It has that unique distinction. But it is a contact sport, and it takes a brave employer to be in business in California. All basic work comp policies in a state, and workers' comp, by the way, is each state determines their own workers' comp rules and regulations. But across all the states, in each state, the workers' comp policy covers the same thing. It covers all disability, temporary and permanent. It covers 100% of medical with no deductibles and co-pays. So you don't have to, the employer does not have to compare one workers' comp policy of one company to another company to see if they cover the same things, the same way they might have to with their automobile policy or general liability, products liability, E&O, EPLI, etc. The workers' comp coverage is mandated by law, and the benefits are specified by state statutes. And again, these policies are responsive to both of those issues. Most employers, generally speaking, have what's called a fully insured policy. And under a fully insured policy, that means that the employer is responsible for paying 100% of the premium, and the insurance company is responsible for paying 100% of the claims. This is known as a fully insured policy. Larger employers and some trade associations and groups can have what's called loss-sensitive policies or programs where their cost of insurance is dependent upon the amount of their claims. But again, these are generally reserved for larger employers or associations or groups. And so most employers will have what's called a fully insured policy. When you look at the cost of workers' compensation, you're not looking at only today. You need to be looking out further, because the future cost is determined by what happens today. So yes, let's say, given a quick example, an employer has presented with 3 proposals from different carriers, and one is $50,000, one is $45,000, and one is $40,000. Well, simple logic would say, well, I'll take the 40, that'll save me $10,000. That's doesn't take any rocket science to figure that out. However, the $40,000 carrier, the reason they're $40,000 is they don't offer any loss control services to help the employer prevent injuries, or if they do, it's very modest loss control services. Their claims handling is done by a third-party entity, which they have a contract with, and they're paying the third-party entity on a per-claim basis. The third-party entity motivation is to handle that claim as quickly as possible for as cheap as possible, and so consequently a claim that blows out of control and cost ends up at a very large claim, the third-party claims entity is not on the hook for that. It's the insurance company, but more importantly the employer's on the hook for that, because that large claim now is on their record and affects their future cost of premium. So fast forward a year from now, and instead of those 50, 45, and 40 proposals, the employer gets proposals of 60, 70, and 80. So that's what we're talking about. In the beginning there's price, in the end there's cost. Picking a carrier and broker is like, in my opinion, how you would pick any other professional. Due diligence is the best method. The same methods that you would employ to pick an attorney, a doctor, or any other professional to go to, you would want to ask some basic questions. How long the company has been in business? What is your experience in my industry? What kind of services do you provide? Who will provide those services and when? And what are the elements of cost and coverage, or cost for coverage and services? In other words, what determines my cost for this? How is it affected? What happens if? These are the kinds of questions that should be asked. Unfortunately, a lot of employers make their workers' comp buying decision based on price alone. Whether it's with their own broker or when they're using competing brokers who come in with a litany of proposals and lay them down in front of the employer, and the employer looks at a spreadsheet and they immediately go to who's the cheapest, and the cheapest must be best. Unfortunately, and I'm big on old adages, but unfortunately there's an old adage that says in the beginning there's price and in the end there's cost. So what that means to me is that the cheapest is not always the best. And in practical terms, if that were true, Nordstrom wouldn't exist.
But if all the... Thank you for watching. Please feel free to call either one of us for a free 1-hour consultation on your workers' compensation options.